Shall we begin? Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli waj'al li wazira min ahli Haruna akhi ushdud bihi azri wa ashriku fi amri kay nusabbihaka kathira wa nadhkuraka kathira innaka kunta bina basira. Allahumma aghfir lana warhamna wa anta khairur rahimin. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa atba'ihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ameen. We're continuing our discussion on the topic of sincerity, reading the 20th Flash. Today, reading the 7th cause. The topic of sincerity, as we've been discussing thus far, has been focused on aspects for believers to focus on, to concentrate, or to consider that promote conciliation, unity, and disregard of differences and disputes. And that's a theme that I feel quite prominent for me as we've discussed the many different questions that have been raised in these causes. Primarily, the way that it's been conducted is that there is a particular sort of concern, such as dispute or success or progress that appears or is apparent amongst those of unbelief, but may not be apparent in those of people who believe in the existence of a single creator. And the author goes on to explain to us what those causes might be. And I generally get the idea that all the remedies associated with these issues have to do with a general promotion of moving away from focusing on differences between the community of believers. And that just does not only mean Muslims, but rather anybody who believes and attests to the basic truth of the existence of a single source of being, regardless of the details that come after this basic attestation of this truth. The focus in order to promote unity and cord or relations amongst believers promotes this idea of focusing on that which is common and promoting it, and that is connected to the various aspects of sincerity, such as removing differences amongst you or amongst believers, disregarding any sort of feelings of comparison amongst believers in matters of practice, faith, belief, etc. Further, if I talk about last week's discussion, we had discussed focusing on the verse that was mentioned in the 6th cause about the avoiding error. I forget, but there's a verse regarding, overlooking or avoiding error in, a graceful manner or in a respectful manner. And the idea that was discussed last week was that the point for us is to support the defense of the single truth. In order to promote unity, we should disregard any sort of cause of discordance amongst the people of truth. And for the sake of, the truth, the common truth, which is belief in the single source of being, details might vary, and we should not make that a point of concern or debate or issue, but rather, as the verse suggested, to look, to look over it with honorable avoidance, as in to not focus on it, but rather focus on the things that are true and those that do unite us. So, with that brief summary, we can begin reading the seventh cause. And we read a paragraph or so, but inshallah, we can reread it and continue our discussion from there. So, reading from the seventh cause. Dispute and rivalry among the people of truth do not arise from jealousy and greed for the world. Dispute and rivalry among the people of truth do not arise from jealousy and greed for the world. And conversely, union among the worldly and neglectful does not arise from generosity and magnanimity. It is rather that the people of truth are unable to preserve fully the magnanimity and high aspiration that proceed from the truth, or the laudable form of competition that exists on God's path. Infiltrated by the unworthy, they partially misuse that laudable form of competition and fall into rivalry and dispute, causing grave harm both to themselves and to the Islamic community. As for the people of neglect and misguidance, in order not to lose the benefits with which they're infatuated and not to offend the leaders and companions they worship for the sake of benefit, in their utter humiliation, abasement, and lack of manliness, they practice union at all costs with their companions. However, abominable, treacherous, and harmful they be, and wholeheartedly agree with their partners in whatever form may be dictated by their common interest. As the result of this wholeheartedness, they indeed attain the benefits desired. So, O people of truth, given to dispute and afflicted with disaster, it is through your loss of sincerity and your failure to make God's pleasure your sole aim in this age of disaster that you have caused the people of truth to undergo this humiliation and defeat. In matters relating to religion and the hereafter, there should be no rivalry, envy, or jealousy. Indeed, there can be none of these in truth. The reason for envy and jealousy is that when several hands reach out after a single object, when several eyes are fixed on a single position, when several stomachs hunger for a single loaf of bread, first envy arises as a result of conflict, dispute, and rivalry, and then jealousy. Since many people desire the same thing in the world, and because the world, narrow and transitory as it is, cannot satisfy the limitless desires of man, people become rivals of each other. However, in the hereafter, a 500-year paradise will be given to a single individual. 70,000 palaces and houris will be granted to him, and every one of the people of paradise will be perfectly satisfied with his share. Okay, there's a healthy sized note. An important question raised by a significant person according to tradition. A 500-year paradise will be given to everyone in paradise. So, since this looks like a question in itself, I will address it as separate to this paragraph that we're discussing, and discuss this as the second sort of point of discussion, inshallah, today. It is thus clear that there is no cause for rivalry in the hereafter, nor can there be rivalry. In that case, neither should there be any rivalry with respect to those good deeds that entail reward in the hereafter. There is no room for jealousy here. The one jealous here is either a hypocrite seeking worldly result through the performance of good deeds, or a sincere but ignorant devotee, not knowing the true purpose of good deeds and not comprehending the sincerity, that sincerity is the spirit and foundation of all deeds, good deeds. By cultivating a kind of rivalry and hostility towards God's saints, he is in fact placing in doubt the breadth of God's compassion. So I'll stop here and go back to the beginning to discuss. So again, very familiar to the way that every section has started here is highlighting a like a, you could say like a contradiction or an issue or a retention. This one focusing on dispute and rivalry, saying the author basically saying that dispute and rivalry among the people of truth is not from jealousy and greed for this world, but rather it is a neglect of how generous and magnanimous the bounty of the Creator is. So, and conversely, if one does observe an apparent sort of unity or relation amongst the people of unbelief, he says it is because they are focused in not losing any benefit within this world, and they are working amongst themselves in order to maximize whatever that this world can offer. So it is in their favor to work in harmony amongst between each other, to support the causes amongst them in order for them to all benefit or maximize the benefits of this world. But that being the basic tension, and we'll go on to discuss also what, again, the author, again, I feel like the remedy, as the author puts it, again, focuses on this idea or a remedy that promotes unity amongst the believers, helping highlight that what you actually, or what people of belief actually are disputing over is actually perhaps not true, or it's not a reasonable conclusion based on their belief. And so what actually is the apparently causing dispute and rivalry amongst the people of truth is inherently just a veil perhaps that exists over their understanding of their existing beliefs. But there was from our previous discussion, there was a sentence or a comment to discuss further the idea of laudable form of competition that exists on God's path. So the author is implying that he's on one side condemning a certain dispute and rivalry, but on the other side there is an implication that there is still a certain sense of laudable form of competition that does exist on this path. And perhaps, as what is implicit in this is that it is actually healthy or beneficial to the people of belief to be engaging in what, and we can discuss what could be implied or meant by laudable form of competition. So taking this point that was raised from last week, it's on the table again. If you want to chime in at any time with how you understand, what sort of definition you give to a laudable form of competition. If I were to just give a certain thought, and I'll get to the verse sent to us by Hamim or shared with us. Obviously, like even in general terms, there's a very, very layman terms, we've got a healthy competition and something that's not healthy for you. I feel like everything, many aspects, if not everything, have these two sides to it, depending on how you look at it or your perspective. I think just the way that we discussed basic, realities of existence is like you could look at your existence as being a created being, an impotent created being, dependent on its source of existence, or you could look at yourself as a, seemingly self-sufficient being with no accountability or responsibility to anything else but yourself. Similarly, I feel like, something like a competition, or if there are other words to put it as, a looking at the other or looking at something other than yourself and seeing points that perhaps make you realize, what your potential is, and you getting a feeling, or that inculcating a feeling of wanting to, capitalize on this realization, and also making the most of your potential. So to seeing that as an example of what can be done, or what is possible for you as a human being. So certainly on God's path, it's there are infinite, not infinite, but there, as many paths as there are people, at least. And there's certain, there's obviously no comparison in direct comparison in, or figuring out, who's better, who's not, who's further, who's not. Yet we do have examples of other human beings. I can, immediately just think about the concept of prophets for us also, who set an example in the way of what is possible for in human potential. And I guess when it does come across in terms of, people that we encounter in our daily life, people like us, people, with sort of in similar circumstance, in living in the same, let's say, era as us, we can admire certain things in their approach, and realize that I don't have it, but I admire it. I see the benefit in it, and perhaps I would like to be more like, X individual, or have this sort of trait in me. And while you don't want to take that trait away from them, that is not your intention to cause them harm or cause them to be lessened in their qualities, but rather you want to increase yours. And in this, God's path, with an infinite source, there is no limit as to how one can develop their qualities, as opposed to goals or paths of this world, where there are limits to, let's say, positions, obviously wealth, and so forth. And in those circumstances, either you get it or the other person gets it. And then is a scenario where dispute and rivalry actually has substance, whereas dispute and rivalry in the path of God does not have substance or truth to it, but rather it is something that, as the author later mentions, could be a sign of hypocrisy, or is comes out of innocent ignorance, I guess, as he puts it. So we have a verse in the chat box with the translation. It's from chapter 2, verse 148. Each community has its own direction to which it turns, raised to do good deeds, and wherever you are, God will bring you together. God has power to do everything. So I am assuming that it is definitely shared in this particular context of of laudable competition, or perhaps definitely a related context. So if you have also any thoughts on this verse relating to our discussion for today, so please feel free. And in the meantime, I can obviously try and give it a try. So very, if we're just taking the translation in this, so everyone, or yeah, everything, everyone has a direction towards which they are headed, motivated, moving. And I guess in this case, it's a command to race towards that is good, or all that is good. And we can also discuss what that good means in this case. Wherever you may be, Allah will bring you forth. So as long as your direction is towards, and if I can, may relate to our previous discussions, if I take the very basic truth, the common truth amongst believers, which is the belief and confirmation and acknowledgement of a single source of existence, of God, if that is somebody's, let's say, direction, whoever they might be from their faith background, if that is their direction, and they, keeping this truth in mind, they go about their practical lives with keeping that intention in mind, and the intention to get to know the creator of whatever that they're doing, and getting to know him through his qualities, through the acts that one is taking, going through, then no matter, I guess where I take wherever you are is in whatever might your level of your capacity might be, your understanding might be, or I guess perhaps your level of execution, or the result, or what you actually, your process perhaps, or results might be. It says, Allah will bring you forth for judgment altogether, as in coming or stemming from this single truth, you will be brought together. I'm thinking again in terms of unity, in terms of spelling out discord, such as that of dispute and rivalry. And indeed, Allah is over all things competent, or He has power to do everything. So from our perspective, our duty becomes to set that foundation, which is referred to as the direction, and keeping that as the focal point in our life, and staying true to that, and sort of seeking that amongst in our community, seeking that point of unity in our community, regardless of the I guess even wherever you are. I can also interpret this as like whatever might the differences be, in, let's say, practice, for example. The 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 foundation of unity is laid, and God will bring his community or this community together in showing them the things to be focused on, and the things that do inculcate um, unity and humility and sincerity amongst the believers. So that's sort of my kind of attempt. If it would be definitely necessary for other people to share their thoughts on this verse and the connection to the topic before we can actually move to any other part. So we have two parts. One is about the laudable competition and this verse, whether you relate it or you do it together. Asim, you can please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, thank you. Yeah. So I'm trying to go along with how you are explaining it. So I think it's about the union among the people, and as I think Brother Ali shared that verse about how whatever your union among a people of certain understanding. So let's say the people of the Quran, and which direction that they have a particular direction that one would go with. So in that, sincerity comes into play, as in you would dedicate your full heart, all your human side qualities, your dedication and aspiration, as we were discussing before, for that purpose, to pursue that. And now if it comes to your affiliation with the absolute truth, hold on one second. Yeah, so when it comes to your affiliation with the absolute truth, now, so that union has to be maintained, as how the author is kind of presenting it, and how the Quran also kind of sheds light on that. And this verse also says, for that absolute truth, for that, try to do and maintain that unity among the people, race to do the good for that, to hold on to that, to pursue, so that that absolute truth is preserved and is not attacked by any, or doesn't become weak by the attack of the others. Because in this first paragraph, the author also talks about the Islamic community, as he says, because that is, I think, the union that the author kind of is trying to make us realize that although we understand, let's say, as people of truth, that how humongous or large or amazing this absolute truth is, to understand that you belong to an absolute source who is really taking care of you and the whole universe along with you. But that idea of maybe nature or anything else as being the source is something that is not acceptable. So that is contrary to the absolute truth idea, that everything is maintained by the absolute source. So that truth kind of is very amazing and powerful, and one is satisfied, but it's not maintained. So there is something that jealousy infiltrates, and the greed for this world also infiltrates and destroys that union. So I feel jealousy is a major part here in terms of how, you know, the unity can be lost. And of course, this, you know, that laudable form of competition is, as I think that what is this verse, particular verse is kind of referring to, that to, you know, my concern should only be for the, you know, my relationship with my Lord, my owner, and that's, you know, where I have to focus myself on, and trying to collaborate and, you know, go along in terms of supporting this absolute truth, this idea. So even though, as you mentioned about, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, Muslims, as you said, it has to be, you can do with anybody who believes that there is an absolute source. So you know, disregarding any of those minute, you know, problems that one would face, or the insignificant feelings that can be aroused. And but even within the people of the truth, you know, we need to, as the previous section said, you know, let go of all those little, you know, things that, you know, divides people, or because those are just minor compared to the actual truth, how magnanimous that truth is. So again, within the, you know, the people that you are in your community, in your, you know, if you identify yourself that to be in union with the Islamic community, so we have to be sincere to get along, and, you know, have that attitude where there, you know, which is not the competition which leads to some kind of jealousy and and the greed for the world, which, you know, which happens because we live in this world. But, so that's how I was understanding this. So that, I hope it helps a little bit. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for contributing and sharing. So again, the point that I heard also you emphasize is whatever that doing good in this case is, or is that which is concerned with the good for everyone and not just for the individual. And I believe that was also a point that was sort of discussed in the sixth cause too, which is the, you know, the example of the soldier that was on the night watch for the protection of, you know, many people. So being on the, you know, doing good can be also interpreted as doing that which is good for the greater community, which is sort of disregarding or overcoming one's own ambition and want for any, you know, personal sort of gain, whether, you know, I guess it can only be worldly. I wonder if there is a, you know, when it comes to, let's say, quote unquote, the God's path, or in the way of, you know, in this path, is there something as a selfishness? Is the, you know, is it even plausible to say that there is selfishness in the path of God? For someone who is sincere, they will try to or will focus on that which is good for the community, that brings inculcates unity, removes differences, or overlooks them for the sake of the collective rather than the individual. So thank you. We can continue to discuss the verse, you know, as other people have thoughts, and in the meantime, perhaps Dr. Ali, please go ahead.
Yeah, what is interesting in the verse that it is clearly understood that the verse is encouraging us to race in doing good. So khairat, what is good? Of course, the definition of khair in the language of the Quran is anything which is done in obedience to God's will. It is khair. And yeah, anything in obedience of God's will is khair. So in order to do anything, anything good for us, we have to remember that I will do an action or I will have an attitude which will be approved by God's will, so that God will be pleased because I am submitting my will to God's will, His will. So my objective is God's will, not people's pleasure or people's will, but God's will. What happens at the end, under any circumstances, as the verse says, "Einama tekunu," wherever you are, it means under any circumstances, God will bring to you all together jami'an. It means if I personally follow the pleasure of God rather than my benefit in this world, but I will act in this world not to get benefit from the world, my ultimate purpose. I may try to get something benefit from the world, but in that action, my objective, my ultimate aim, target will be to obey God's will. It means to obey God and be aligned with my will and God's will. That is what we have to try. In any action, I will ask the question, what God asks me to do here? Which kind of attitude I should take? That God will tell me this. It means my aim is to obey God in my attitude. So if I do this, God says, God will definitely bring your good for you as a result of the good action all together. It means if I do one thing for the sake of God, only to obey the God, which is a laudable form of competition, the people are doing something in order to contribute to uphold the truth. I will do also something in order to uphold the truth in addition to my friend. It means like you see that what is called a rope, a thick rope. In fact, there is no thick rope. There is only thin threads. Joined each other, came together, and a thick rope is the result. What does it mean? If I add my string to the other strings, not only I save my string, I help to save I'll help saving my string, but also strengthening the resistance of the other people's string. So my thin string will not break, but at the same time contribute to the strength of the other weak, feeble strings of each individual. The result will be for the whole community. The result will be in the whole community. But the translation on the screen diverts the attention to another point by saying for judgment. No, but the text says you will contribute to the, I don't think this bracket in bracket explanation is appropriate to the content. But whatever, the meaning I gave makes it clear. You can use the chat box, and the translation says there, so this, God will bring you together, strong. It means unite you together so that you can make a strong rope that cannot be broken easily. Because people of truth, by definition, is expected not to have a worldly purpose. But while we are dealing with our worldly affairs, my purpose is to follow God, to follow God's will. So my purpose must be to contribute to the strength of the community, so that the believers' community must be standing and holding to the truth of the God's religion, holding to the truth of God's religion. They are preserving the community together, so that the community will have a strong resistance against any attack or against the people who have not shared the same belief, or maybe try to destroy the belief. So that is what the point I wanted to bring to our attention, because it attracted my attention, that we will come together if everybody races to do good deeds for his share, rather than competing with each other. Because if we start competing with each other, it means we are not uniting, we are breaking the string of each of us, so that there will be no rope at all. I will break my fellow believer's string, he will break my string. And then both of us will be deprived of strength completely. So the competition, the dispute between the people of truth does not come from the dispute from jealousy in order to get some worldly benefit. But dispute rises from lacking the sincerity by the believers, so that we miss the strength of the community and the truth will fall down. It means defeated. And we will not help when we compete. We will compete. If we compete each other, we won't help the truth to stand up. We will contribute to the destruction of the truth when we compete with each other, saying that you are not doing good, my string is better than yours, and you have to follow my string, rather than uniting them together, making a rope together, strong rope together. But in order to make this, Quran reminds us that we have to compete in doing good things, not compete with each other. That's why the people of truth must be very careful, because people of truth have in their minds, I am doing something in order to please God. I'm not interested in gaining the pleasure of other people. So what I do now, I act individually. I see the truth only in my hand. The others are not following the truth. So I blame them that you are not doing right, you are wrong, your string is nothing, forget about it. I am going to make the whole rope by myself. And you cannot, you can do only your string. That's why Quran gives an extremely important guidance here. Raise to the good things. Not, it means do not race between themselves, nor against your fellow believing person, people of truth. That's what I understood from the verse. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. So just taking some of the points that you mentioned and, for summary purpose, for reiteration, you help define the word khairat as that which is done in obedience of God's will or to gain God's pleasure. And to do good, or the race to do good, is that one acts in this world to obey God's will. And with that sort of race to do that, believers are brought together in this, common goal of theirs. And the race to do good is not to, or doing good is not to seek any, particular pleasure of other human beings, but rather just is focused on obeying or making one's will in line or conform to the will of God, ideally. And the purpose of this is that it ends up strengthening the community. And the example that you gave was very clear, that the threads, a rope is not, just like a single piece, but rather lots of threads that come together, not just to end up strengthening themselves, but also strengthening each other, wherever that thread is intertwined. And the purpose, or what ends up being sort of the product in this world for seeking the pleasure of God, is that it helps us, or the believing community, strengthen themselves as a community. So thank you for sharing that. I was just thinking of something that, again, like, I think it has to do with the way that I'm thinking about it, that might need to shift. But in a way, it does can let, talking about this concept, let's say, to a, let's say, to people in family, or people, let's say, with non-specialized knowledge about such topics. They look at things very, practically also. While this concept, as we are discussing, can appear a little bit not abstract, but perhaps difficult to translate in practical terms. Like, how is it that, if one talks about it in our circumstances, like if you say, and it is also, again, a very, maybe I can even say a cliche thing to say, that, what the Muslim community needs today is to strengthen their iman, which can also be understood as, doing things for God, or with keeping that reality in mind, or is generally how it's understood too. That is the strength of the Muslim community. I think, regardless of how deeply one understands these various concepts, I think generally people tend to agree that that is the way that, you know, a believing community will be strengthened. I don't think anybody will say that, you know, you have to do it by, I don't know, acquiring a certain wealth or power, etc., in order to strengthen them. Yet, you know, the as the author has mentioned, and you know, an issue like this can persist. You know, the fact that everybody, or generally the people in the community, will agree to this concept, or a way to strengthen or inculcate unity. But how, you know, I wonder, how does it actually translate into practical life, and does it, you know, I do think that there need to be some sort of evidence or markers in our practical life that shows whether or not that is actually a lived reality, or rather just sort of, you know, a sentiment that people have, or agree on. Like, so, you know, is the sentiment, you know, enough? But that's just a thought. Okay, sorry. I'll hold the mic clearly. So moving into other parts of this paragraph, let's see. So in the, so if the first paragraph, I think we've discussed most of the themes, especially a note on the side that the people of neglect are focused on not losing the benefits of this world, and hence are, you know, motivated, or it's in their interest to practice union, as the author says, at all costs. You know, like I think about like a game, or even a game show or a quiz. You know, in order for you to win, regardless of your team members, who they are, where they're from, whether you know them or you don't, you know, you don't know, you may not know anything about them, but yet, you know, the goal of winning, in order to win, you will probably do anything to get along. But outside of that, there might not be any, you know, any sort of core points of union. And that is what I understand to be sort of the way that in matters of, in worldly matters, it is easy, or it is in one's interest to practice union at all costs. And when it comes to all costs, it also can include things, ways that are, as the author says, treacherous or harmful, as long as people can agree on attaining that common interest. So that having a goal that is limited to this world is the, you know, it is sort of the factor for actual dispute and rivalry. Whereas the people of belief, any dispute or rivalry amongst them is just coming out of a lack of understanding of their, you know, or not lack of sincerity, as the, you know, as it's mentioned, in matters of in one's connection to their to belief, and understanding what the purpose of that is. So moving to the second paragraph, the author says, it is through your loss of sincerity. Dr. Lee, you can go ahead, sorry.
because I was going to go to the second paragraph, you introduced it, but you introduced it, and if I need to say something in addition or in support, then I can join. Please, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the, thank you. So the author says that, you know, O people of truth, it is through your loss of sincerity and failure to make God's pleasure, as we discussed, the point of khairat, that making anything but seeking God's pleasure as the aim is the, he says, the age of disaster. And as we were also discussing, and the point made by Dr. Ali, that if in this rope, one thread is, you know, insincere for whatever reason, or loses its sincerity in making God's pleasure their sole aim, not only do they harm themselves, but they also, breed discord and disturbance in the community. Just as strengthening is not just strengthening yourself, but also the community, so is, losing track or disregarding or failure to make God's pleasure one's aim. In matters relating to religion and the hereafter, there should be no rivalry, envy, or jealousy. I'd say this point seems to be very clear that, you know, when it comes to matters of religion and the hereafter, and we discussed this in one of the previous sessions, that because the reward for in the matters of religion do not lie within this world, neither are they known within these conditions, and that knowledge and that judgment rests with that which is not of the nature of this universe, no one can make a claim or, either know about what the other person will get or deserves. And so there is no point of contention. Whereas within this world, rewards or results have the capacity to be known. And let's say in the matters of, let's say, rivalry or envy, you know the position of the other, you know what the other one can have or does have. And knowing this information, or someone having it and not having it, is a reason for, or not a reason, but perhaps like a reason for developing envy, and envy then leading to jealousy. But when it comes to matters of religion and the hereafter, not only things are unknown to us in terms of reward, for example, but they're also cannot be known by us in this world. And so there should not be a reason for envy or rivalry. And I would imagine that if there is one, then that means that someone is thinking about religion not in those terms of, not in divine terms, and somehow attaching any worldly gain and status within this world, and hence, risking themselves to envy, or either cause envy or envy somebody. So, and then we can go on to the next page. Okay, Dr. Ali, I think your hand flashed. But none of these, in truth, The reason for envy and jealousy is that when several hands reach out for a single object, when several eyes are fixed on a single position, when stomachs hunger for a single loaf of bread. First, envy arises as a result of conflict, dispute, and rivalry, and then jealousy. Um, so, I I feel like I sort of just attempted to address the same point that things of this world being limited in nature and known in nature in 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 their nature um, is the reason for envy and then for jealousy amongst people. And when it comes to worldly things, um, perhaps depending on the era also or society, but generally also, I think people tend to also want to have the same thing in this world. And not only are those things limited, but transit um, temporary, I think that intensifies someone's, or one, obviously, as the author has mentioned, they do not satisfy the limitless desires of man. And two, it can, knowing something is in short supply and is, um, not going to be refilled is perhaps, a greater source of envy, jealousy, rivalry. I'm reminded of like the rush for things that happened in the beginning of, quarantine period when people would rush towards getting something knowing that it is in limited supply. And the behavior or the attitudes that we observed in mankind um, is, seems to illustrate this, very, very clearly. Um, but as the author says, however, in the hereafter, 500-year paradise will be given to a single individual, and 70,000 palaces and houris will be granted to him. And every one of the people of paradise will be perfectly satisfied with his share. Um, I understand that this sort of wording has to do with a limitless or something that is, ample in abundance, um, and it satisfies. Someone is perfectly satisfied because their limitless desire is satisfied with a equally limitless, provision, and um, giving no sort of cause or reason, as we said, for envy or jealousy to exist. We can move on to the note if nobody has any thoughts or comments on this section thus far. If this point is clear, um, so Dr. Ali, go ahead.
What I understand that this text is encouraging the people of guidance not to compete with each other as if they are going to share the limited supplies, as you said, and gives the bread example. There is one loaf of bread and there are 10 hungry people. They will compete, and it may be right for them to compete because the source is limited, but their desire is many and much more than the limited source. Human capacity also never gets satisfied, whatever this capacity gets from this world, because the human capacity asks for the eternal life. That's understandable for the people of misguidance, because their aim is to get a piece from the universe, from this world. But if, by definition, the purpose of the people of guidance to reach out, to gain God's pleasure in this world and in the hereafter. Of course, the example is given in the footnote is in the hereafter, but representing what? God's infinite capacity to satisfy every individual being. every individual's need. And this is not a limited source because source, it is not a limited supply because the source of supply is infinite. So why are we competing with each other as if I get some part of the paradise, excuse me, if you get some part of the paradise and my paradise will be shrunk and become smaller. No, there's no such thing. Of course, the paradise in the hereafter, that is correct. Hereafter, the paradise is always described as limitless. But in this world, I can understand that in my practical life, if my aim is to gain God's pleasure, to keep God's religion and support God's religion and follow God's will, not compete with my friends, fellow friends, believing friends, but only aim at God's pleasure, which is sincerity. What are we aiming at? To gain the pleasure of the absolute being. So if anybody else also gets the pleasure of the absolute being, it doesn't harm me. It doesn't damage my benefit. By definition, God is absolute, and it means the source of supply is infinite. Why bother? Why do you compete with your friend as if he's going to share your paradise? No. That is a very simple and clear example in order to satisfy human ego, saying that, look, if, of course, addressing the human spirit, don't listen to your ego. It leads you to a way that you will compete as if somebody obtains God's pleasure before you will be left off with nothing. So you will lose. So please hurry before they get it and compete there with your friend, fellow believing friend, rather than gaining God's pleasure. I must follow my way without competing with my brother, with my believing friend, and as if I will go before him so that he won't get it. No, let him go. You go your way. Let him go his way. Don't really clash. Don't compete with him, but compete in the way of doing good. It means in the way of following God's will, so that you will gain God's pleasure. So that is the best way of gaining sincerity, knowing what you are struggling for, to get the pleasure of the absolute being. So the supply in his hand is limitless. Don't worry about it. Don't be jealous of your friend. Don't rival with your friend in the negative way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Now we can read the note. An important question raised by a significant person. According to tradition, a 500-year paradise will be given to everyone in paradise. How can worldly intelligence comprehend this truth? The answer. In this world, everyone has his private and temporally limited world as broad as the world, the pillar of which is his life. He makes use of his world through his inner and outer senses. He says to himself, "The sun is my lamp, the stars are my candles." The existence of other creatures and animate beings is in no way negates his ownership of these. On the contrary, they brighten and illumine his world. In the same way, although an infinitely higher plane, in addition To the garden of each believer that contains thousands of palaces and huris, there is a private 100-year paradise for everyone apart from the general paradise. He will benefit from this paradise and eternity through his senses and feelings. He will benefit from this paradise and eternity through his senses and feelings according to the degree of development they have reached. The fact that others share in general paradise in no way harms his ownership or benefit, but on the contrary strengthens these and adorns that vast paradise. Man in this world benefits from a garden lasting an hour, a spectacle lasting a day, a country lasting a month, and a journey lasting a year with his mouth, his ear, his eyes, eye, his taste, and all his other senses. So, too, in that realm of eternity, his sense of smell and touch, which is his transient world, bare, barely profit from a garden lasting an hour, will benefit as if from a garden lasting a year. The sense of sight and hearing, which here barely profit from an excursion lasting a year, will there be able to benefit from a 500-year excursion in a manner fitting that realm, adorned from end to end. Every believer there, according to his spiritual rank and gain, delight and pleasure through his senses that will expand and develop in relation to the reward he has earned in this world and the good deeds he has performed. S- Definitely, this answer to the question raised in this box has to do with what Dr. Ali also had just shared, that to each individual, there is a path or a connection, an individual unique connection to the infinite source of existence. And it does not overlap with any other connection between any individual being. Um, so, in this answer, though, there are other themes that um, caught my attention. Primarily, that one of being that everyone, any an individual has the capacity or will or has the potential to develop their capacity based on how they use their senses um, in this world, and um, that the the senses within this world are limited temporally and limited to the physically to one's exposure, um, yet but the same senses will have a um, depending on how well they are trained to recognize or to seek, I should say, the pleasure of God, to obey God's will, or perhaps to recognize the qualities of the Creator, that depending on how well they are trained, that will correspond to their pleasure or experience in paradise. This is a little bit tricky trying to understand it as I read it, but if other people want to also chime in, it will also help me get some time to think about it. And for the sake of my own limited understanding, and it's always helpful through this class to reorient, certain imagery and vocabulary we've learned from our childhood. You know, I'm sorry if this is very, um, you know, uh, could be a silly question, but I'm curious within this context to also understand, the what does huris mean in this context. It's been mentioned a couple of times here. I know the question is directly addressing the question of the 500-year paradise, but it would be also interesting to understand the other aspects that were mentioned. Um, yes, Dr. Ali.
Yeah, the purpose of this subject is not to define what huri is, none of my business, whatever it is. What is meant to be by paradise is my all expectations, which are given to me by my creator, will be satisfied by my creator. My concern is this satisfaction will be at the level of my capacity of belief and submission to God's will. So I have to take care of my side. These are symbolic descriptions in the Quran that paradise, you will have a house, a castle, and water is running under it. It means you will really enjoy whatever you want to do, whatever you want to have. God will give it because God is the one who created you with this desire. That is an obvious case that if he is the one who created this desire, any kind of desire in human beings, he is promising that he will satisfy it if only you deserve to get there. That is the point. For example, in the school system, college system, there are degrees 1 to A, B, C, D, or degree 4, 1, 2, 3, up to 4. But it is a promise that if a person fully fulfills his assignments, his duty of studentship, he can get the 4. That is in the system, institution of the education. It means they are promising, if you do your part perfectly, we will give you the full mark. That's a promise. If you do, but mind yourself. Don't say what is 4, why not 5? That is the system. So we should not really get engaged with what is 500 years? What does it mean? Which year in this world, in your classical world? These are symbolic teachings. We have to give us symbolic things so that human beings can imagine with 500 years of the pleasurous play. Oh, I will enjoy it as much as I want. That is what the Quran gives examples for in order to present the promise of God that as long as you do your job, he will give you the 4, degree 4, or grade 4. It means A plus. You do your job, made your job now. So that is interesting that we have to understand the teachings of the Quran in terms of providing some symbolic examples and not to get lost in the symbols themselves. But we have to concentrate what these symbols refer to. That's what we can understand easily, what the Quran is, how the Quran is speaking to me and educating me and really training my feelings towards the understanding of my Creator and His promise. You can do that. It is obvious. So I see no point in talking about Uri. It will be nothing but speculations. Because the symbol, for example, talking about the palaces and underneath the river is running. What is that? Which kind of palace is it? Can you show me a plan of it, for example? Meaningless. It's so obvious. Why do we talk, not only you and me, but the Muslim people talk about the nature of Huri? Why not for girls, boys, and men and women? Who said that women, Huri is for men? It is a symbolic expression of the pleasure of human beings in paradise if they fulfill their duty. It means they get a grade to deserve to go to paradise. That is the point. Inshallah, we won't spend time on it. And the following paragraph, I don't know, we don't have much time. It gives a good example, clear, simple example that we didn't read today. Maybe we may leave it or we may read it because it is self-explanatory. So we may read it because, I don't think this is the end of 20th Flash, the rest, and I don't think it is so clear. We wouldn't have much left to discuss, so we can start from the 21st Flash. But if we have any questions and some vague points, we can discuss on it. Otherwise, we can cover it because the example is so simple and understandable. Thank you. I should stop now.
No, thank you, Dr. Ali. I'm glad you clarified it, and I had a feeling you'd do it this way also, which is not getting into the specific of things. But it's always like kind of interesting to me how specific terminology is for symbols sometimes. And, if let's say when things are mentioned in such specific terms, it just sparks curiosity. But I understand that the point is not to get into defining what the nature of this particular word is, but how to approach it. So we can continue reading so that we can start the 21st Flash from next week. An instance supporting this truth: one of my former companions nurtured hostility to someone. His enemy's good deeds and sanctity were once favorably described in his presence. He was not jealous or upset. Then someone said, "The enemy of yours is courageous and strong." We saw a strong vein of jealousy and rivalry suddenly appearing in that man. We said to him, "Sanctity and righteousness bestow a strength and exaltation like a jewel of external life. Yet you were not jealous of them. Now worldly strength is to be found in oxen and courage in wild beasts. In comparison with sanctity and righteousness, they are like a piece of glass compared to a diamond." The man replied, "We have both fixed our eyes on this world on a single object. The steps lead to it are provided by such things as courage and strength. It is for this reason that I was jealous of him. The objects and stations of the hereafter are without number. Although he is my enemy here, there he can be my beloved and intimate brother. O people of the truth and the path, the service of the truth is like carrying and preserving a great and weighty treasure. Those who carry that trust on their shoulders will be happy and grateful whenever powerful hands rush to their aid. Far from being jealous, one should proudly applaud the superior strength, effectiveness, and capacity of those in upright love come forward to offer their help. Why then look on true brothers and self-sacrificing helpers in a spirit of rivalry, thus losing sincerity? You will be exposed to fearsome accusations in the eyes of the people of misguidance, such as pursuing worldly interest through religion, even though it is something 100 times lower than you and your belief. Earning your livelihood through the knowledge of truth and rivaling others in greed and accusativeness. The sole remedy for this disease is to accuse your own soul before others raise these charges, and always to take the side of your fellow, not your own soul. The rule of truth and equity established by the scholars of the art of debate is this: whoever desires in debate on any subject that his own word should turn out to be true, whoever is happy that he turns out to be right and his enemy to be wrong and mistaken, such a person has acted unjustly. Not only that, such a person loses, for when he emerges the victor in such a debate, he has not learned anything previously unknown to him, and his probable pride will cause him loss. But if his adversary turns out to be right, he will have learned something previously unknown to him, and thereby gain something without any loss, as well as being saved from pride. In other words, one fair in his dealings and enamored of the truth will subject the desire of his own soul to the demands of the truth. If he sees his adversary to be right, he will accept it willingly and support it happily. If then the people of religion, the people of truth, the people of the path, and the people of learning take this principle as their guide, they will attain sincerity and be successful in those duties that prepare them for the hereafter. Through God's mercy, they will be delivered from this appalling wretchedness and misfortune from which they presently suffer. Okay. We can just sort of discuss some parts of it, and then the moderator next week can go deeper and move on. So I think we started reading from a little above in the page. Right. So the stories of a man who is illustrating the very point that we've discussed so far, the fact that goals or desires of this world are inherently also a source, or can be a source, of rivalry and jealousy. But in matters of religion, over here it says the hereafter, things will be according to what one desires, which it appears to me that, something within human nature is also to desire, the desire is not for enmity and animosity, but rather of union and collaboration. And when it comes to matters of religion, matters in the path of God, they will be met, or the purpose in seeking them, keeping in mind the will of God, will be that of union. And so I understand, the man saying that in the hereafter his enemy will be his beloved and his intimate brother, in that in the way of satisfying or working towards the will of God, or seeking that or realizing that, people can, there's harmony amongst creation, or amongst beings. So in this second and third paragraph, says those who carry the truth. Right. So the author says that, like knowing that somebody has better strength and better capacity should be a good thing, because it shows you that you have, somebody, or you have a source of help in that individual. So looking at them in the spirit of rivalry is not beneficial to you and to your strength. And as we discussed it before, like an individual's strength lies in the strength of those around him. And so if something or someone can be a source of strength to you, and help and aid to you, then that that should be seen as something that's not also strengthens you, and does not, in this case, is not a threat to you. And doing so will, further, not only are you if inflicted within rivalry, in this case, not only are you harming the unity or the strength in you, by the cause of rivalry being a lack of sincerity, a lack of understanding that your aim and purpose is to seek the pleasure of God, and that source is infinite, and so rivalry does not make sense, especially with somebody who's also seeking the same. Then not only are you harming yourself and the community, but you're also giving an opportunity to those around you to, instill further discord and issues in the community. You're letting your, let's say your real antagonizers use this to their advantage, or I guess it's like kind of, throwing, oil on the fire sort of a situation. And I know we're out of time, so perhaps next week's, this last paragraph almost serves as a somewhat of a summary for this part, and inshallah, it will give an opportunity to summarize a little bit of what we discussed in this cause, and then move on to the 21st flash. So if we can take a couple of minutes if anybody has any thoughts to share at this time, anything they'd like to want to discuss next time for the moderator to keep in mind, that would also be helpful. But if not, then we can say the closing dua and conclude our session for the day. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Wa akhiru da'wahum anil hamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Al-Fatiha.